Welcome to the SwimStrong Dryland Podcast. We are dedicated to inspiring and educating the swimming world. Our podcast highlights the work, character, and achievements in and around the SwimStrong community. I am excited to introduce Bryan McPherson to the swimming world here. He is the Director of Program Research and Development at SwimStrong Dryland. We're going to pick his brain and give you guys all kinds of awesome insight into the way he thinks and programs. But first, we got to get to the most important thing, rapid fire questions. Bryan, are you ready?
Definitely.
All right, let's get it. Celebrity you'd most like to meet?
I know that I have to say Tom Brady.
Dang it. All right. What's something most people don't know about you?
We have 3 dogs and a cat, and one of those dogs only has 3 legs.
Who is the smartest person on the SwimStrong Dryland staff?
We're all the smartest in our own specific areas. Got to hit with the classic athlete non-answer on that one.
Cop out. All right. Who's the funniest on the SwimStrong Dryland staff?
I really think it's Greg, because he'll ask his technologically challenging questions. Like he referred to Facebook as the Facebook yesterday. And I'm like, I think it's got to be Greg.
What's your favorite candy or dessert?
So my wife will make, not all the time, every now and then she'll make these like brownie combo things. So it'll be bottom layer brownie, second layer cookie dough, and then Oreos on top.
Oh,
like those. Yeah, there's a reason she doesn't make those all the time.
That's awesome. What's a hidden talent that you have?
I've been playing bass guitar for 14 years. So over half my life at this point.
Bryan is really good at that. I've heard a lot of his stuff. What do you love most about SwimStrong Dryland?
The impact that I get to have on, well, honestly, like thousands of athletes' careers and coaches as well, obviously, but mainly the athletes who are getting after it, doing the workouts. It's just really cool that I'm able to do that from this room, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, appreciate you answering those so the people can get to know you a little bit more and your opinions on the SwimStrong staff, even though you skirted around one of those answers. Good. Well done. But we want to jump into your journey. So Bryan, tell the people a little bit about your journey, how you even got to be where you are with SwimStrong Dryland. What's that looked like for you?
Yeah, so I was born in 1996. My parents, shout out Purdue. I was born on Purdue's campus. Then I moved to the Illinois side of St. Louis, this town called Edwardsville. I started swimming year-round when I was 12. And I was always the guy because I feel like, like strength coaches, dryland coaches, whatever you want to call me, we get into it because we're not that good at our sport, but so we're gravitated towards like the sports performance side of things, which was definitely the case for me. Like, and I don't think people realize, which I'll get to, like you were actually my dryland coach from my sophomore year of high school up until I graduated and left for school. So, the group we had, like Pete, Jake, Pat, like Peter, I don't think anyone ever called him Pete. But the guys we had, like the Roberts brothers, like, so for like the 6-7 guys we had that I was training with, I was the slowest in every event. I'm pretty sure. Like, I think I may have gotten Jake in the 100 breast once. But so like, I noticed like, I'm able to beat all these guys in the dryland side of things or in just like working out of the water. So that's something that really attracted me to the whole world of dryland as a whole. So I honestly almost left the sport as a whole. I would say like 3 or 4 times. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. But then it was a matter of, no, I like working out with Eric. So I guess I'll stay on the team, even though it was mainly for the dryland side of things. Is for some days, 100% was the reason why I was still going and why I continued with it. So that led into, I kept swimming, obviously. I went on a swim at Eastern Illinois, class of 2018. Then I started, because I started getting interest in, I can do this whole dryland sports performance thing as a career. So I started off actually as a sport management major, but then I realized once I started, looking more into it, I want to do exercise science, KSS. So I transferred over to that. And then with our relationship personally, like I remember asking you questions and like we were still having that communication there. So that led into, me graduating, finishing up at Eastern. Then I was like, because I had a couple internships along the way in collegiate weight rooms, because that's what I thought I was mainly going to get into. So we were communicating all that stuff that led into the internships, which led into I got into the University of Louisville for my master's program. But the really cool part about that was both years I was there getting my master's degree, I was able to get into originally the mentorship program, which is like the internship program, but it's beefed up a little bit, honestly, in the Marshall Center, which is where the Louisville sports performance coaches train the sports teams. So my first year, I was with swimming, track and field, volleyball, a couple other groups here and there. But my second year, or at the end of my first year, I was offered a spot by the head strength coach, the director of the department, Jason Durking, to stay on and work exclusively with the swim team. So that was the easiest yes of my life, because there's a really fast team. They have like Olympians, NCAA champions. So that was really beneficial to see how they were doing things from a dryland standpoint. Because I think, so I was in there from August of 2018 up until the first COVID lockdowns. And it was around that time, I think I jokingly asked you something about because I knew SwimStrong was a thing. And so I think I jokingly asked, oh, if you have space in the future, let me know. And it turned out you actually did around that time. I think it was like February, March of 2020. So that's about the time we started working together professionally. And then it kind of just built up from there.
Yeah. It's funny thinking back on all of that because Bryan, from my point of view, for everybody watching, he was never the most talented person in the water, but he was always one of the hardest working. And I admired that so much. You heard him talk about just how there was multiple times where he thought about even quitting the sport. But yeah, I just remember you thinking about whether it was for you or not. And you were always one of the hardest workers, though. And it inspired me in ways that I don't think you realize to this day or ever really can realize, or that other people can realize, because you were a lot like me. Like, I wasn't a super talented athlete. I just worked. I had to outwork everybody if I was going to keep up. And you still ended up doing a really good job throughout college, D1, and through swimming career, and constantly improving. So you're still in the top 5%. But most people in your situation would have been like, I'm not talented enough, and this hard work isn't worth it. I'm not like the best. That was inspiring to me. And then seeing your journey growing as a strength and conditioning professional was even more inspiring, because you took the things that you learned from the pool and the mindset that you gained in the water and out of the water with the dry land, and you applied that to learning and coaching. And similar to me, I feel like coaching I'm much more passionate about, or more gifted in, than I was as an athlete. And so, we want to see average athletes beat great athletes just by having discipline and good programming, smart programming, a strong mindset. And we see that all the time. You can be an average, talented athlete, but be great. And then if you have a lot of talent too, you could be the greatest, right? And so anyway, whatever level of the spectrum you're on, people who have that mindset inspire me. And you are one of those people, and SwimStrong wouldn't be SwimStrong without you and going through that process. And you always ask great questions. And then you mentioned kind of your journey all the way through Louisville. And then you spent, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 years at Lindenwood University too, correct?
Yeah, a year and a half. We moved out to Oregon in January of my second year.
Got it. What was that experience like, programming for the swim team there?
Well, it was really nice to actually get to do it, because just with the way my career path on the collegiate side of things worked, I was interning for, I think, 3 years straight is what it was. I was doing part-time personal training jobs on the side, obviously, to get an income. But when it came to actually programming at Lindenwood, I had the swimmers and I also had the men's hockey team. It was like, I finally get to do this. This is awesome. It was pretty awesome, because I remember talking to the coaches, the swim coaches specifically, and they were saying, oh, dude, this is going to be awesome, because there's not a lot of former swimmers that go into the collegiate sports performance world. Mm-hmm. So I know they were psyched to get a former swimmer to talk to about, the sport as a whole, but obviously be the guy who was writing the programs for the team. So I know they were really excited about that. And I definitely did something that you did when you were coaching with us, not with the swimmers, but with the hockey team, because I remember asking those guys just simple questions about, because I can skate, but I can't skate. So I would ask them questions, because to backtrack, what you would do, like, I'm pretty sure you wrote some of our sets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yep.
like you would ask us questions like, hey, like, how did that go? Like, what changes would you make? Just like general, as a guy who didn't swim, you were asking the questions you needed to ask. Like, that's what I would do with hockey. Like, I'm a big hockey fan, but I never played a shift in my life. So I would ask them literally just simple questions about like, hey, like skating backwards, if you have to turn on a dime, like those just basic stuff. I would go to practice. I would ask about, hey, like X's and O's types of questions. So I definitely remember doing that kind of stuff that I picked up from you when you were doing it with us. When it came to actually programming, it was just pretty awesome to finally be able to get to do it, because the team was awesome. Like, I had a ton of fun working with all the athletes at Lindenwood. Like the ladies won conference the first year I was there. Like, the guys absolutely got after it. And then it was just a manner of being able to, okay, cool, I've been doing all these internships. I've been doing like the practical, like programming, program defenses, all that stuff. Like, I finally get to put it in action, which was really cool. Because it's just a manner of understanding certain aspects about the sport that you may not pick up on as quickly if you didn't do it. So when you're looking at the unique demands of the sport, when it comes to the shoulder, obviously for every stroke, and then when it comes to the groin, the hips for breaststroke, for instance, that's the question. Like, whenever I talk to strength coaches, I actually have a call with a D1 coach right after this. That's a question I'm going to ask him. Hey, how do you approach the hips, the groin for your breaststrokers, for your IMers? To certain things like that, it was pretty cool to be able to do that and be able to do it with a group of athletes who are just ready and willing to get after it.
Yeah. Well, so seeing you go through the journey, not just getting your master's in exercise phys and working with the Louisville swim team, and then running the Lindenwood programming, and then you and I started working together with SwimStrong, and it wasn't long before I realized that you were really gifted in the way that you are programming, your thought processes, the way that you see the biomechanics of the sport, the way that you look at the different joints, the impact they have on the body, and how we can really make our swimmers resilient and healthy for the long term, and at the same time getting the most out of their training so they can be the best athletes they can be. And something that blew me away about you is I was like, this guy is a rock star and is going to be significantly better than me at the programming. I saw it. Like, I saw it even when you were going through your master's program, the questions you would ask, you were so much further ahead of me than I was at that point. And it just made me excited. And so when we were able to work together, and just continue to see your growth and development, it's exciting. I was like, this is something I want to give our athletes the best of the best. That's something we do, I think, that's unique about SwimStrong. Like, none of us need any credit for anything that we're doing. We all just want to give the athletes and the coaches the best program we can. That's why we have so many people who we work with who are all the best at what they do. And it was pretty easy for me to see that you are the best at this. And so I'm wondering, coming from that college strength and conditioning setting and being a club swimmer your whole life, how do you feel like that prepared you well to program for club swimmers from the 8 and under level all the way up to the senior level as they get ready for college? What has that been like for you, and how do you feel like that's benefited you?
Yeah, so I think being able to see, because I think it was like 5 or 6 different weight rooms from the collegiate setting I was in. Like, I know the types of movements, the types of exercises they're going to be exposed to at that level. But at the same time, it's a manner of, like, long-term athletic development is the term people throw out there, because from understanding how repetitive of a sport swimming is, a lot of people start it when we have like 5, 6, 7-year-olds in the program who are swimming as their primary sport. So it's a manner of getting them exposed to, and also getting them, competent and confident in the movement patterns that they're not going to get. Because whenever I'm talking to athletes, I'll use hockey at small group athletes for the interviews, who do swim year round and have been swimming year round for a while. I'll use hockey as an example, because those guys, like outside of the goalies, not counting them, they had to account for their 4 teammates, the 5 opponents. Where's the puck at? Like, they're literally on ice, so they have tenths of a second to make a decision sometimes. Like in swimming, you dive in, you go that way, and then come back for 2 hours a day for 6 days a week. So in terms of like rotating, moving side to side, you don't really get a lot of that. So with the 8 and unders, like it's really just a lot of practicing, the basic movement patterns like a squat or a high plank hold, like those types of things. And then just playing games where they have to be athletes out of the water, basically, because from a program wide standpoint, I pretty much just want to develop SwimStrong swimmers as athletes out of the water who just happen to swim. And there's the resiliency, athletic development benefits that come with that as well. So, I mean, the 8 and unders, you're really just looking at, can they move out of the water? We're going to do things to address the overall resiliency of the shoulder in an age appropriate fashion, obviously, because I can't just ignore all the yards they're swimming. But it's going to be a manner of, they're going to be doing athletic things out of the water under the umbrella of, hey, like they are swimming many months out of the year, if not year round. And then whenever you get up the line, and honestly, like that general theme of developing them as competent athletes out of the water still remains, but it's just going to be in more of an age appropriate fashion. So the 8 and unders are practice time games, 11 to 14s, let's say. Every age group, every team is different in terms of how they split their age groups up, obviously. But then let's just say 11 to 14s, it's going to be, hey, like practice time circuit. They may still have a game in there, but they may be reacting to another, maybe reacting to a teammate with side shuffles, for instance, assuming they're on a surface where they're not going to slip or anything like that, But it's going to be a little bit more so, okay, like you can handle a little bit more since you're obviously growing. You've been in the program for a little bit longer. Maybe we can add, maybe you can hold a med ball on your squats, for instance, to certain simple things like that. And then whenever they get to the high school 15, 18 age group, that's when I get a little bit more specific and a little bit more in depth. Like obviously, because they're more mature, they have, generally speaking, they'll have the body awareness to do some of these more technical movements from a shoulder resiliency, hip mobility standpoint. So that's when I really add in the exercises that address the serratus anterior, the hip mobility, the overall just components of the shoulder resiliency, athletic development, like balance exercises. That, because obviously like the whole program is not that, like we're going to get after it with the pull-ups, squats, like push-ups, those types of things, but it's also going to be alongside the movements that contribute to a resilient athlete out of the water.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I love that theme that you're talking about, just developing athletes who happen to swim. So I think that's something that's been missing in the sport for a long time. And I really think that people have a misconception that, if you're 8 and under or 10 and under, you shouldn't really do dryland. And I always find that funny because, well, one, not only is that scientifically untrue, if you're strength training young athletes, it's actually going to develop them better if you do it correctly. That's the important thing, doing it correctly. So having a professionally designed program by someone like Bryan is going to be very different than a coach just ripping them through stuff to make them tired or sore, right? Like that's a terrible measure of a workout. If how much you're sweating, how sore you are, how tired you are, anybody can make somebody sore. Anybody can make somebody sweat. That has nothing to do with the progress that you're making. But you ask 8 and under or 10 and under to do a 25-yard butterfly or a 50-yard butterfly at a swim meet. You want to talk about something that looks dangerous? Watch that.
Yeah.
Watch their body being contorted in the water and just trying to survive for 50 yards, sometimes more, without good technique. We're asking them to do highly technical things that are physically demanding in the water, that require good mobility, that require strength, that require endurance, that require good movement patterns and body awareness. So if we don't teach them that out of the water and then we just throw them in the water and have them swim, they're going to be in trouble. Like that's a setup for injury, not doing dryland. So anyway, I just love the way you talk about developing athletes and how that changes obviously significantly at each level and how you address things differently depending on what their maturity level is. But can you talk a little bit more about just your philosophy when it comes to, we'll focus on the older athletes a little bit here, philosophy in terms of, I think everybody has heard a lot about like general strength and conditioning for a swim athlete, but how about what things do you take into consideration that make SwimStrong unique? What are things that you do to make sure that our athletes are moving really well and staying healthy? Maybe you mentioned shoulder resiliency, hip movement patterns. knees, ankles. What are some of those considerations that you take into play that a lot of people skip?
Yeah, so like I said, we're gonna do the pull-ups and squats, like the basic upper push-pull, lower push-pull, like that stuff's gonna be in there. And it's probably the exercises you're thinking of right now that are gonna be in there. Like I'm a big KISS kind of guy. I keep it simple, stupid. But so like that stuff that is gonna be in there. But I think it's really the consistency, because when I say shoulder resiliency, it's not just one T-spine exercise in the warm-up and then that's it. There's gonna be, I would say, like 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 if you count the warm-up or the mobility flows, exercises per day that will contribute and fall underneath that shoulder resiliency umbrella. So it's the consistency and how many exercises are actually in there, because I'm not going to say it's a priority and then only have that one exercise in the warm-up and then all this other stuff. It's going to be scattered throughout the workout consistently from a shoulder resiliency standpoint. And then with the hip mobility, because I do know from like an overall mobility standpoint, some coaches are more so along the lines of, if you train with a full range of motion in your strength exercises, you are addressing mobility, which is true. But I think like if you just look at a swimmer, again, I think it just comes back to understanding the sport. They're doing the same thing over and over and over for 2 hours a day for however many days per week for however many years. So I think addressing the mobility side of things will allow the athlete, the swimmer, to create more efficient movement out of the water, which will lead to more efficient movement in the water. And again, like it's specific movements that they're probably not getting a lot of, or they're not getting a lot of in the water. So from a mobility standpoint, they're always going to do some form of 90-90X. There's 7 or 8 that I like to rotate through, and others are in the mobility flow as well. So those are in there, because especially with breaststrokers, there is a good amount of hip internal rotation on breaststroke kick. I know every single athlete's kick is different. Like some stay pretty narrow, some get their feet out a little bit more before they snap back together. But regardless, if your feet comes out, that's hip internal rotation. And so that's a movement we want to make. We want to help develop the athlete to become as efficient, as competent as possible, because that will lead to a more powerful kick. And that leads into training the groin directly, whether it's from Copenhagen planks, banded exercises, work, single leg unilateral exercises, however I go about it. Addressing the groin is going to be something that's in there. And then straight up just balance exercises, because, swimmers have that fish out of water stereotype, especially even swimming year round. Again, it goes back to my example of like hockey players, basketball players, football players have to be aware of all these things going on. They could potentially have to react in a 360 degree motion, depending on, or a 360 degree direction, depending on where the ball, puck, opponent is going. And swimming, it's down and back for 2 hours a day. So even though the water is inherently, an unstable environment, I was talking to, that was a really good conversation I had with the coach of the elite camp, Kevin. It was after one of the first workouts. So he had a really good conversation, kind of opened my eyes, because he gave me some swim coach perspectives on things, because I was doing balance exercises anyway, whether it's, you stand on one foot, or younger athletes, it may just be standing on one foot for 10 seconds. Like older athletes, it may be you close one eye. There's 3-4 balance exercises I'll put in there to specifically address, the athletic development component on just being an athlete out of the water. So that'll be something as well. Because again, it was a good conversation with Kevin, because he mentioned, the athlete, since the water is inherently an unstable environment, like you do need a certain level of body awareness in the water to maintain your body position. So that was something like I was already doing the balance exercises anyway, just from, hey, being an athlete out of the water. But that was really, really interesting conversation, because it led to, oh yeah, there is a direct swimming. There is a tie to swimming to doing that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that mind, but people always talk about, oh, that athlete has a great feel for the water. That just means mind-body connect awareness. Like they have a good mind-body connection. They understand what muscles are supposed to be engaging. They understand how to catch the water properly. They understand how to maximize their body position. They can feel drag better, and understand shapes in the water. And I think that can be learned in dryland. That's not just a natural. Some people have more natural talent, like from the beginning, but you can learn that feel for the water and that mind-body connection. And so what you're speaking to makes a whole lot of sense, and can really help you as a swim athlete. But thanks for sharing some insight into that. I think that's really good for people to hear and understand how important those things are. I can't tell you how many people just jump into workouts and think, oh, I want to get bigger and I want to get stronger and all these different things, which we do. We want to get stronger and faster and more powerful in the water. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset though? Like why, if you have a weight room, that's great. But if you don't, you just have equipment on your pool deck, we're not limited. And I think some people think I need to be doing something with a barbell as I get to that higher high school level to reach the highest levels. And I think you and I would both say that's the furthest thing from the truth. And actually, even if we have access to that, we're still going to do a lot of things that don't utilize that because of you get the most bang for your buck with different types of exercises as a swim athlete. But I'm wondering if you can address that mindset and the way your philosophy around that versus getting stronger versus getting stronger as a swim athlete.
Yeah, I forget which coach I was talking to, but I said something about, it was a couple of days ago, I said something about how, being strong for a football player, being strong for a power lifter, obviously, being strong for a swimmer, hockey player, basketball, whatever, like being strong for a swimmer is very different than all those things because it's a manner of, obviously, strength contributes to stability, which can contribute to resiliency and all these things. But it's a manner of, let's just use the squat pattern as an example, like back squat, let's say, compared to some other exercises. Because typically what I like to utilize with club level athletes is I just prefer unilateral exercises. I think there's some benefit to that. Like I know that it's potentially a hot topic within the strength coach community, like bilateral versus unilateral. I do like unilateral for a couple of reasons. One, again, just say, can the athlete confidently, efficiently produce force while they're biasing one leg? That contributes to the athletic development thing I mentioned earlier. But also from a training efficiency standpoint, there was some research done utilizing force plates that showed, for example, if an athlete has the ability to do a skater squat, just a single leg squat, if you do one single leg squat body weight, that equates to, per the force plate data. So for me personally, I weigh 208 pounds as of this morning. So if I do one body weight squat, that equates to me putting 100% of my body weight, 208 pounds on the barbell on my back and then squatting that. Wow. So from a training efficiency standpoint, obviously that said, like, it's another question entirely. We're just going to say the athlete has the ability to do a skater squat with good technique and form and all that stuff. So that's another question, obviously, but assuming they do, that's a really efficient way to train. And a similar thing could be said for Bulgarian split squats, rear leg elevated split squats, whatever you call them. It was the same researcher, Alex Natera out of Australia, who did it. If I'm remembering correctly, it was Bulgarians. If you hold 50% of your body weight in dumbbells, weight vests, kettlebells, like whatever weight you have, and do, again, like let's say 5 reps, that comes out to me doing 5 reps of back squat with my body weight on the bar. So just from a training efficiency standpoint, it really gets the job done because some of our club teams only have dumbbells up to 50 pounds. Like they don't have gym access anyway. So they can still get the job done while their athletes are getting the training benefits of training unilaterally, being able to efficiently absorb, produce force, stay stable on one leg. And then even for the teams who do have the training means to do a barbell back squat or other, traditional, barbell exercises, let's say, it does come back to, hey, I like unilateral training for the athletic development benefits we've mentioned, but also at the same time, this goes back to my time coaching in college. Like, you're not going to hit, and I don't want to hit your, let's just say your dry land ceiling or your sports performance training, dry land training, whatever you want to call it, ceiling during high school, right? Like I still like, okay, cool. Like we've been hammering you've been getting really good from a technique standpoint, and you've been getting strong doing the Bulgarian split squats, the forward lunges, reverse lunges, skater squats, if you have the ability to do those. And then whenever you get to college, okay, cool. Like if you're going to train in that traditional weight room setting, you're going to have, that's going to be your next step. You haven't taken that next step 3 years previously, so I do like that because it leaves, again, like we're talking about 15, 18s, talking about high school athletes who are still developing. So they still have that next step to take whenever they get to college. Because even then I know some, because I I talk to collegiate strength coaches. Some of them do barbell back squat, just to keep that example. Others stick with a little bit more the unilateral side of things. So you may not even do back squat, because when it all boils down to it, I mean, like skater squats, back squat, front squat, forward lunges, split squats, every lower body, like wall sits, all those exercises are really just different roads to get to the same goal of achieving lower body strength. So, I mean, whichever road you take, and I will say from a overall training philosophy standpoint, I do really believe in athlete autonomy. Like within our, whenever I was coaching in college, like for example, to go to the upper body on what was the primary upper body push day. So there were athletes doing barbell bench press, dumbbell bench press, landmine press, dumbbell floor press, and push-up variations. So we had 5 different movements going on one day, because some athletes preferred barbell bench. And I would say like, hey, like if you're good with the shoulder, if you prefer it, okay, cool, let's go with it. Because I do know some swim coaches out there, like barbell bench press is just a no. Like in that situation, they were good with it. But if an athlete had shoulder issues, I would tell them, hey, like go to the landmine press or the floor press today. And for a lower body example, they had trap bars at Lindenwood, so I primarily utilized trap bars. But there was one athlete, shout out Evan, like he straight up told me, hey, like, can I do barbell deadlift? I prefer that over trap bar. I'm like, if you don't have any, like, if you're good to go with it, yeah, if there's no issues with you doing barbell deadlift, that's fine. Like you're picking up weight off the floor is still a deadlift, right? If you prefer barbell over trap bar, like that's fine. And even nowadays, I'll tell athletes, obviously from modification standpoint, if we got to get, like, hey, Brian, like I'll have an athlete text me, hey, like push-ups hurt my shoulder. It seems to be kind of a consistent thing. What can we do? Like, because the priority for them is training consistently in the water, not doing push-ups, honestly. So if I can check the box of upper body strength with, whether it is putting a foam roller under your chest for the push-up, or if you do dumbbell floor press for a couple months while you may see an in-person PT to address the shoulder, like if you're doing floor press, push-up, like variation, whatever, like you're still checking the box of upper body strength, because the priority is, for me, the priority is to keep the athletes training as efficiently and as consistently as possible in the water. And if that means we don't do push-ups for a bit, okay, like we're not going to do push-ups for a little bit. Or it may be if you squat below 90 degrees and your hip pinches, for instance, okay, we can do a wall sit at 90 degrees so you stay out of that range of motion. Like it's really that simple. Allow the athlete to train as efficiently, consistently as possible while checking the boxes I want to check from a dryland standpoint.
So I love that philosophy, and all those things that you just shared are amazing, right? Because sometimes people really get stuck in their ways of saying like, you have to do this, but every athlete is different. Every athlete is unique. And I think that's something that makes you and us at SwimStrong unique as well, is that we will help the coaches figure out any variations that they need for every single athlete on their team, right? Like we will send out, you'll create workouts for each group based on their skill level, where they're at in their development mentally and physically. But there are always people who aren't at the same level. And so that's where communication comes into play. And that's where being flexible and giving the athletes some autonomy and making sure that they understand what it is to train safely and effectively, that it's not, hey, I need to lift as much as this person or do the exact same exercise they're doing. Like you mentioned, if you can't squat below 90 degrees without pain in your hip, like then we shouldn't be doing that, right? Like there's no reason to but then you'll get some coaches who are like, no, you have to go like all the way every time. Like this is how you do a squat. But it's like, that's not how everybody does a squat because everybody's body is unique and designed differently. And I'm also hearing you say there's a lot of different roads to get to the same goal. And so you don't need a barbell to be strong. You don't. You can be just as strong without ever touching a barbell in your entire life and get different athletic components like stability and mobility with the unilateral exercises that you were talking about. And by the way, unilateral, bilateral for any lay people out there just means single leg versus double leg is what Brian was referring to before. And the studies are amazing on it. The research backs it up. And so I actually, to your point on how we can get as much strength out of unilateral exercises than we can with a whole bunch of weight on a barbell. Just as an example, at Eagle Aquatics, we did a lot of unilateral work for years, only had dumbbells for a couple of years. Never had anything besides that. And then going into the 4th year, where some of the athletes were sophomores, juniors in high school for the first time, we got trap bars. And we had girls repping out on sets of trap bar deadlifts between 250 to 300 pounds like it was nothing. And they had never touched a trap bar before, right? They had never. And I know people who have lifted for a long, long time and used heavy weights, and they could not move weight like these girls, and the guys were moving weight as well consistently with good form. So the strength is there if you program smart and understand where the athletes are in their stage of development. And I think something people are afraid of, and maybe you can speak to this next, is that like they want to try and keep up with the Joneses, right? They feel like, people are doing a lot of dryland now and we need to train X amount of times a week and do this and do that. You don't need to keep up with anyone. You need to train smart and get the most out of your training, right? And so it's not more weight, more sets, more time. It's how do we get the most bang for our buck? What's the lowest hanging fruit to make them the best swim athlete they could be? But could you talk a little bit about that, about what it is to work smarter versus harder?
Yeah. So before I get to that, something you just said about, keeping up with, this athlete does this. An athlete in my small group, it was a couple months ago, but he texted me saying something about, like, hey, what are your thoughts on Olympic lifting? I forget the athlete, but it was a collegiate athlete or a collegiate program. Like, dude, you're a junior in high school still. Like, you got a ways to go. That just goes back to my point about that will give you somewhere to go. Cause like we're doing RDLs, we're doing squats. And by the way, if anyone's thinking like, oh, they never do bilateral, like, well, Eric just said, we do deadlift variations. We do RDLs. I mean, we'll do goblet squats. So bilateral squats. It's just, I do trend more unilateral. So I wanted to address that in case someone was thinking, oh, they never do anything. Yeah. When it comes to, like Olympic lifting, for instance, okay, we can do squat jumps. We do broad jumps, med ball throws, like the classic exercise you're probably thinking of, because if an athlete is listening and you're curious, every single strength coach, once you get to college, if you can do a squat jump and if you can hip hinge RDL correctly, you're good. Like every single strength coach is going to set you up for that, which is what I'm doing right now. Like it's just a matter of taking that next step once you get to school. But when it comes to working smarter, not harder, I would say I'm definitely a big quality over quantity guy from a volume standpoint, specifically because from, certain points of the year, obviously for us, like September, for instance, September 20th, as we're recording this, like it is a higher volume month from a dryland standpoint. But after this, I'm going to be shifting towards a good amount of tempo work with the strength, and there will be tempos included because, the term is time under tension. How much time are our muscles under tension for? So you could get that, for instance, something I did all the time when I was coaching at Lindenwood is, we're not going to do sets of 10 on pull-ups. We're going to do only 4 reps, but we're going to do a 5-second hold at the top, for instance. So it's a way we can get that time under tension, the way we can address, the muscular strength with that pull-up movement specifically, because that's obviously very important for distance per stroke and a powerful stroke in the water. But I'm only going to do 4 reps. Yeah, there's a tempo on it, but I'm cutting, as opposed to doing sets of 10, okay, I'm cutting the volume by 60%. 10 reps down to 4, but there's tempos on it. And the same thing can be said with the lower body, for instance, squat, split squat, we can put tempos on those as well to help limit the overall volume, because their entire sport is volume with what they get in the water. And they're pretty much, I think what club athletes get 3 weeks out of the water, maybe a year, like maybe a month. So that's something that's always in my mind as well. And then also just making sure everything is in tune with the time of the year, the time of the season, because when it gets closer to the championship meets, for instance, obviously, and it's just basic periodization at that point. But it's going to be the med ball throws, the jumps, just making sure everything is fine-tuned from a dryland standpoint to allow them to feel as good as they can in the water. So making sure they train quality over quantity from a volume standpoint. Obviously, that's going to look different at different times of the year, but making sure that they're able to, it goes back to what I said earlier about they can train as consistently and as efficiently in the water as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the peak performance programming that you're referring to is another way in which we give athletes and teams autonomy. Hey, you know how your athletes recover. You know how they perform at championship meets. You know how your body responds. And the athletes know better than anyone how their bodies respond, right? So we need to give them autonomy in what they're doing. We'll obviously give them the guidelines and the professional program design behind it. But if someone tends towards more of a distance event for a 4-day prelim final meet, maybe they like to train a lot closer up to the meet because they need to be swimming fast on day 4 after, having raced 10,000 yards that weekend or whatever it is already. And then maybe you have some people who, hey, I signed up for all hundreds and 50s this week, and it's a 2-day meet or 1-day high school championship meet. And that peak performance race preparation program looks a whole lot different, and their body's going to respond a whole lot differently for what the lead up to that looks like. So I think that's something very unique about SwimStrong, is just how personal we are with all of the teams, coaches, and athletes that we work with. And you specifically, and everyone who's involved with our programming, Steve, do a phenomenal job with making sure that the coaches have that support. And so we're going to have to do a part 2 here, Bryan, because I'm getting excited about all these things. There's a lot of other things I wanted to get into, but we're going to have to cut it off here. That's some amazing stuff. If you're an athlete or a coach watching this and you're like, man, this is great information, but I don't know what to do with all that and how to program all that. That makes sense. We're not expecting you to. This is our job. Bryan does 2 hours minimum of research every single day. Like this is his lifeblood, to where he just loves it, eats it up. And because we always want to be learning and giving you guys the best programming on the planet that we possibly can. And the only way to do that is continually getting better ourselves and never getting to the point where we say, oh, we have it figured out. That's dumb. If anybody ever says that, run away, because nobody ever has it figured out. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? And that there's more to learn. So, but we are happy to help you if you're in that spot as an individual athlete or a team. That's something that we're passionate about, is helping you guys get the most out of your dryland programming. There's a lot more to it, but that's just a little plug there for the way that Bryan designs programming and what we do with SwimStrong. But Bryan, thanks so much for taking the time, man, and educating all of us, and for all the work that you do that makes an impact on our athletes and athletes around the world. And we'll look forward to a part 2.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, part 2 is going to be rocking.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for listening to the SwimStrong Dryland Podcast. If you'd like to be a part of the SwimStrong Dryland family, you can reach out to us via email or social media. You can also follow SwimStrong Dryland on YouTube and TikTok for more educational content.